Hey you! Do you remember the last few episodes when we talked about how cheap anamorphaking is, looked over off-the-shelf solutions, and dove into streak flares? If you don't, make sure to go back and catch up. In the last video, I promised we'd get to lens modding, so here we go. The time has come to open up the lenses and create your own set of anamorphics. I chose EF as the standard mount for all of these tutorials because it has such a long flange that you can adapt them to almost any camera system. Plus, lots of Reds and Alexas have EF mounts, so I would call it a budget PL. Before we start opening lenses, remember the previous video and have everything ready at your workstation. Get all of your tools within reach and work one lens at a time. Take notes on where each piece comes from and its orientation, so the process of rebuilding is orderly. Contax Zeiss is my favorite lens family. I fell in love with them years ago while looking for something cleaner than USSR optics, but with an organic and vintage vibe. When following down that path, most people reach the Contax versus Leica dilemma. For budget reasons, I picked Contax, and I still have not changed my mind. The set we are going to modify is the slower and cheaper set of Contax Zeiss lenses. These are f2.8 lenses, while the fast sat is based on f1.4s. Besides the oval inserts, there are many other mods to optimize them for video, like swap the mounts from CY to EF, focus gears, standard fronts, and super fancy lens caps from SIMMOD Lens, which we will also cover here. This budget Contax set is also a great match for gimbal work because there's very little difference in size and weight across the lenses. The 135 is the only exception. You can read more about the Contax Zeiss lineup at the Contax Zeiss Survival Guide by Nick Morrison. All the lenses we are going to modify can be found in both AE or MM versions. AEs are older and cheaper because they display a ninja star shaped bokeh at their second stop, while MMs are newer and have cleaner shaped bokeh. I recommend using AEs for this process because they are cheaper and we will cover up the ninja star by using the oval inserts. The only exception between AEs and MMs in this set is the 135mm. I could not figure out how to disassemble the AE version, so I had to switch for an MM. Lucky for us, the price difference is not bad. Before we get started on anamorphaking these lenses, let's replace the defunct Contax Yashica mount with a permanent EF mount using SIMMOD's SIM mounts. You can get these at SIMMOD's website, just make sure to get the right model to match your lens, as each one is slightly different. Installation can be challenging and get in the way of anamorphaking, so let's do it together. Before we get started on taking out any screws, we'll use a heat gun or a soldering iron to warm up these screws and liquefy any old glue or thread lock that might be lurking under the surface. This step is almost surefire way of getting stripped screws. There's nothing more frustrating than that when modding a lens, so please be careful during this step. If using a hot air blaster like mine, cover the back of the lens with a piece of cotton and heat-resistant tape so the glass is extra safe. Once you've heated up one of the screws for a few minutes, bring out your JIS 000 screwdriver and with as much torque as you can muster, take out the screw. Repeat the process for all the other screws on the mount. Then make sure all the screw holes align and carefully put the screws back into place, without over-tightening any of them. You are better than that. If you have the MM version of this lens, the next steps of this tutorial on opening it up will be incompatible. The steps for the MM versions of all the lenses in this series are available in written form on the PDF version, so go get it. I'm modifying a handful of lenses in this video, so check the marks on the timeline to find the ones you're looking for. As an alternative to the more popular 28 2.8 contacts, here I got the instructions to modify the 25 2.8, which is unfortunately more expensive than the 28. The extra field of view is something to consider, along with great minimum focus performance. This Contax offers good control over distortion, even for such wide angle. If you decide to jumpstart the mod like me and already have a SIM mount installed, place a tape triangle aligned with the middle of the SIM mount logo at the top. If you still have the original Contax Yashica mount, you can align the tape triangle with the mark that indicates focus and iris. With the lens wrench inserted in the notches around the rear element, unscrew the whole group out. This will clear the path to the aperture mechanism. Now set the lens body aside. Get your oval insert and orient it according to the mark that we placed before disassembling this part. You should use small pieces of electrical tape to secure it into position. The last bit is to put the lens back together. The aperture mechanism works just fine, and you can reverse the mod at any time. If you do so, please take care to remove all the tape residue from the inner element. The 28 2.8 is a classic lens in the Contax lineup, preferred by many over the 28 2 Hollywood due to its small size, cheaper price, and stellar performance. Sharp, even wide open, this is a better wide angle than my other wide Anamorphics, the Pentacon 29 or the Mir 10A. Close focus is at 0.25 meters, just under a foot. And this is what gives this Anamorphic an edge over actual Anamorphics. It is really hard to do extreme close-up wide angles. With the lens mounted to a camera, note that the line for aperture and focus marks faces perfectly up. So let's place a piece of bright tape to mark that direction as the long axis of our oval insert. Our area is very small, so it's okay to get it sort of in the right place. Then unscrew the outer locking ring, and that will bring out the rear optical groups, giving you direct access to the aperture mechanism. This is doing something else. Oh, because it wasn't at infinity. Now it's out. And so this will bring the rear group, setting the lens aside. Get your aperture disc. When you put it over the inner glass element, that goes right against the aperture. The disc is much bigger than the available space. So cut it to the best fit. Take small steps and do not worry too much about keeping the outside a perfect circle. Mine always look ugly. Now that you got it to the right size, orient the oval according to the mark we placed before disassembling this part. Then use some electrical tape to secure the oval in place. Here it is, the tape. Orientation is nice. The last bit is to put the lens back together. The aperture mechanism works just fine, and you can reverse the mod at any time. If you do so, please take care to remove all the tape residue from the inner element. The slower 35mm f2.8 budget Contax is a super strong performer among 35mm lenses, even when compared to Contax's own f1.4 version. It has a much more compact and lightweight build, making it perfect for gimbal work. 35mm is close to 28mm, but this focal length will allow you to do cleaner close-ups than its wider counterpart, not distorting your subject's faces so much. With the lens mounted to a camera, note the aperture focus line faces perfectly up. Place a piece of bright tape to mark that direction as the long axis of the oval insert. Unscrew the outer locking ring, and that will bring out the rear optical groups, giving you direct access to the aperture mechanism. I'm using one of those rubber grips just because there's no notch for the lens wrench. Here's the aperture. Set the lens body aside. Get your aperture disc, and when you place it over the inner glass element, the disc is much bigger than the element's surface. Cut it to best fit. Take small steps and do not worry too much about keeping the outside a perfect circle. Mine always look ugly. Now that you got it with the right size, orient the oval according to the mark we placed before disassembling this part. Then use some electrical tape to secure the oval in place. And the last bit is to put the lens back together. The aperture mechanism works fine, and you can reverse the mod anytime. If you do so, please take care to remove all the tape residue from the inner elements. This 50mm is the cheapest lens in the set, and many people prefer its performance over the twice the price 50 f1.4. Besides, the speed difference between them is less than a stop. It features a long focus throw in a tiny body. The 50mm focal length also shows up much more pronounced oval bokeh. Opposed to the two lenses before this one in the Contax lineup, we will not have to mark anything with tape to screw it back into place. Begin by focusing the lens to infinity and then use the lens wrench to remove this locking jacket from the back of the lens. This will unlock the entire rear group. They can also fall off the housing, so carefully reach in and lift this entire piece. Place the oval aperture over the bottom of the rear group and tape it to the sides with very thin strips of electrical tape. So put the elements back into the body, aligning the oval with the markings on the top of the lens. And I'm going to align the oval with that. Just drop it in there. Gently put it in. It needs to be rotated a little bit. Screw back the locking jacket and you are done with this part of the process. The aperture mechanism works fine and you can reverse the mod anytime. If you do so, please take care to remove all the tape residue from the inner elements. Using a sonar design means this 85mm uses less elements than its bigger 1.4 planar sibling. This lens delivers better contrast and flare control in spite of being 2 stops slower. It is much lighter and smaller than the 85-1.4, matching the rest of the set in size and weight. Resolution is consistent across all aperture values, razor sharp, even when wide open. We are back to marking the rear group with a tiny piece of tape. Take note of the lens's orientation when mounted to a camera and mark what is up. Hint, it's the little line mark between the focus and iris values. Place a little triangle there. Use the lens wrench to take out the rear group and set the lens body aside. Place the oval insert in the housing for the rear group and align it with the tape mark. This time, we actually have some room in there, so use tiny bits of tape to lock it in place. Screw the rear group back in and you are ready to move on. The aperture mechanism works fine and you can reverse the mod anytime. If you do so, please take care to remove all the tape residue from the inner elements. Well, the Contax 135, the 135 2.8 is almost a staple in any Contax Zeiss set. Cheaper than the f2 version by $1,000, this one performs just about the same as its expensive sister at f2.8. The challenge is working with it even slower because of the oval insert. I would not recommend shooting dusk or night scenes on it, but it's not impossible. Although trickier than the previous lenses in the set, this one is worth anamorphaking since it gives you the prettiest and largest bokeh while being razor sharp on focused subjects. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take out the mount. And there's 2 layers to this, so I am going to first take out these 2 screws. Now we have the 3 screws that hold the mount in place. We're going to take them out. And underneath them, there are 4 screws that hold the assembly for the aperture. So we're going to take those out as well. Try to hold down this mechanism because it will want to pop. So next, we're going to lift this whole assembly with the aperture ring. There is a spring inside which will fight against you a little bit. So during this step, you can declick your lens if you want to do so. The spring that is pushing against the mount is holding a little ball bearing that makes the clicks. By separating the mount from the aperture ring, this little ball is likely to come flying out. I'd advise against declicking it right now, as this makes the aperture ring way too light and easy to accidentally spin. So I'm going to lift this straight up while keeping pressure down. And we took out all of these tabs and we get access to the inside of the lens. So I'm going to put this on the table facing down and in a way that it will not spring by itself. Just like we did for most lenses so far, the piece where we are attaching the oval insert screws into position. So we have to mark its final orientation. So I'm going to make a little tape triangle. I am going to orient it with the aperture line. So this is going to line up with this. I used the screwdriver to get it into position since my fingers are too big. So after the mark is secured, focus to infinity and unscrew the tube with the glass elements inside. This tube can be very, very stuck. Mine, I had to warm it up. One way to get a better grip on it is to wear gloves. And some of these edges are also very sharp, so it makes me less scared of getting my fingers cut. Okay, so that turned. I just needed to get started. Now we're going to slowly screw it out. So once the tube is out, we're gonna carefully fold the oval insert and slip it inside of the tube through the opening that faced the aperture. The disc is just big enough to cover the glass. Twist the oval according to the triangle mark so it has the right orientation in the end. And then I'm gonna use small pieces of electrical tape to secure it. Since this area is way too small for my fingers to go in, I'm gonna try and use the key as a helper for laying in this tape. So now the oval is lined up with the triangle and it's been secured properly with the little pieces of tape. Before screwing the tube back into position, be sure to move back the iris mechanism to full open position. The mount and aperture ring will slot inside of the gap, and this is key to keep the lens functional. So before we screw the tube back in, make sure you open the aperture all the way and don't go too far. Once the aperture is wide open, screw back the tube with the oval in it. And then we're gonna check the orientation of the oval and the triangle against the aperture line again. If it looks off, take it out and adjust. Okay. So this is our line and this is our oval. I'd say we're pretty good. If everything looks good, it's time to put the mount and the aperture ring back. This is the most tense part because the little ball bearing keeps trying to jump out. So hold it firmly and slide the aperture lever into its shaft. Everything aligns neatly once it's in place. All right, so I'm gonna lift this, holding from the bottom and turn it upside down. Now, this part is going to go into this slot that we were looking at, and this other part is going to control a lever on this part here. And I'm also holding in, applying downwards pressure so nothing pops out of place. So this is going to go in, and it kind of goes. Now here, I want to orient this to be at 2.8, so everything is in the right spot. So you can rotate the mount until it aligns with the holes. And before we put it into position, I'm gonna rotate the aperture and see if it works as expected. You hear the clicks. So I'm just holding in. And now I'm gonna put the screws back in. And I'm always applying pressure so the mount doesn't pop off. And as soon as I put on the first one, then I can relax on that front. And if you tighten these 4 little screws that hold the aperture ring in place, the aperture will become extra stiff. So do not over tighten them. All right, so we got this. And now I'm gonna install the SIM mount, which goes over the original mount. And with this, we're finished with the Contax set. This is the 135 and it's the last lens that we had left. Now with an oval insert installed and aperture still working fine. Now we're almost done with these babies. The next upgrade is adding focus gears. Again, from SIMMOD. All lenses on this set take the small-sized focus gears, with the exception of the 135, which uses a medium size. To add them, you measure the diameter of the lens using a caliper, then pick the size that matches from the website. Each gear comes with 4 rubber rings of different sizes. Pick the one closest to your measurement and insert it into the metal focus gear. Next, focus the lens to infinity. Not doing so can damage your helicoid, and we don't want that. Then, gently slide the focus gear to where you want it to be. Pro tip number 1. I almost always ended up using an insert 1 mm tighter than my original measurement. If you still can't get a good grip, all focus gears come with shimming tape, which will help you cover the difference and get a perfect grip. Pro tip number 2. Since this is a matching set, and we already talked about gimbal use, I always try to place the focus gears at the same height on all the lenses. This way, when swapping lenses, I don't have to adjust the positioning of the follow focus at all. The last step is to give them a unified front size at 77 mm with 80 mm outer diameter, which is a cinema standard, using SIMMOD Cine rings. Lucky for us, all lenses in this set have 55 mm filter threads, so pick that from the list and you're good to go. And, of course, no cool mod is complete without mind-blowing lens caps. For my set, I went with a vaporwave vibe, customizing the templates offered by SIMMOD's website. If I had $1 for every time someone did a double take because of my lens caps, or asked me about them, I'd be rich by now, and ordering more lens caps. This completes the process of anamorphaking and cine transforming the Contax lenses, making them ready for action. I hope you got some of that good stuff here. See you on the next one. Chito Fadings out.